We are tracking the DOJ upheaval, a slew of prosecutors resigning. One federal prosecutor has also signed now a motion to go ahead and request the dismissal of those corruption charges against the New York mayor. That has been the focal point of this. It took longer because of the Trump DOJ's inability to get things done. In this case, things that their own recently departed aides say are wrong, improper, potentially even unconstitutional. Ed Sullivan is the trial lawyer with the DOJ Public Integrity Unit, who is close to retirement and helped this go forward under serious pressure from Trump officials. And so this is a story that matters. As I've said this week, it's one of the stories that the Trump White House is not promoting. And it's gotten far more difficult, messier, took a much longer time, as I mentioned, than they intended. Now, the Trump DOJ official here, Emile Bouvet, reportedly gathered the lawyers in an unusual morning meeting with a lot of pressure. Now, again, remember, this is not how the DOJ normally works. It's not even how most of the federal government works, although surely sometimes there are big, tough conversations. But we're talking about something far more unusual with regard to carrot and stick pressure, according to this reporting, which also matches the very whistleblowing we got from these recently departed officials, including the promise of some sort of reward for those who would sign and file this controversial motion.
He gave them an hour deadline to decide who was going to be the person to put themselves on the chopping block.
We'll all get fired, but who's going to replace us? They're going to hire us with loyalists to make sure this never happens again.
The judge, though, has to agree to drop this case officially.
It's very inappropriate for the department to engage in that kind of overt political bargaining.
Danielle Sassoon, she's a profile in courage.
Rather than having a public integrity section with 22 lawyers, we will now have a public lack of integrity section.
That is just some of the concern and the reaction we've seen. You can see the story is a big one across all media. It's not like even Fox News, which has been more friendly to the administration, is ignoring it. You can't ignore this many resignations. What one former SDNY chief said on this program this week looked like almost a Nixonian Saturday Night Massacre. Now, the lead prosecutor on the Adams case resigned in protest, stating, if no one will tell the president that what they were trying to do is basically wrong, then, quote, you'll eventually find someone who is enough of a fool or enough of a coward to file your motion. No system of ordered liberty can allow the government to use the carrot of dismissing charges or the stick for a separate political agenda, the letter states. And he goes on to invoke what could be Donald Trump's point of view, call this a sort of more ignorant or benign, friendly explanation that even if Trump wants to treat this like a transaction, that is wrong. He says, I can even understand how Trump's background in business and politics might enable seeing this as a good, if distasteful, deal. But any assistant U.S. attorney would know that's wrong. That is just one of the warnings from one of the several now resigned prosecutors, 6 in all. And this is all coming out of the SDNY, where Trump has had so much of a focus. The mayor was accused of offering essentially a bribery deal to Trump, that he gets preferential treatment, which he otherwise wouldn't get, to dismiss this case, and then the mayor would help Trump politically on immigration in New York. That is completely out of bounds. And as we've mentioned, although none of this should be very political, many of the people objecting are sympathetic to Republican and Donald Trump policies. That's part of how they may have stayed in the administration even for 3 weeks, although some of them were career level. I just quoted you from one who said he gets the Trump as a business view, but this is wrong, and it's the job of the lawyers who swear these oaths to draw those lines. Here's how our colleague Rachel Maddow described it.
So we're putting these charges on ice for now, so Eric Adams can run his re-election campaign without technically being under indictment, and then we'll see how we feel. And maybe we'll bring the charges back based on consideration of all the relevant factors. Talk about having leverage over somebody, right? We're taking the charges away for now, but we could put them back, depending on all relevant factors. It prompted this headline from Josh Marshall at his news site, TPM, quote, Donald Trump is now the mayor of New York.
One reason this is also obvious is that it is meant to be obvious. These are the opening efforts in shock and awe to show they're in charge. It doesn't mean it's working perfectly, it's quite a cost to pay for the DOJ to lose 6 top people and have this kind of open revolt, to have reports about meetings where people are being threatened or rewarded for doing things that basically they can't find DOJ lawyers to do, even those who clerked for Scalia and are sensitive to Trump, even those who would say to you if you ran into him at a dinner party, look, he's a business guy, this is why he's thinking that, right? That's starting from a place of empathy with Donald Trump's history and perspective, but still coming back to the point that lawyers don't do this. Now, we should note that the Adams officials have denied this type of deal, although there were notes from credible parties taken and then apparently seized by the DOJ, multiple lawyers describing this who seem credible otherwise. Donald Trump issued a denial and a false statement about this this week, as we fact-checked. Now, in a joint interview with Adams on Fox News this morning with a Trump official, Border Czar Tom Homan said this.
Imagine him going inside saying that the only way Mayor Adams is going to assist in immigration, which I was calling for since 2022, right, is if you drop the charges. That's quid pro quo. That's a crime.
If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, right, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, where the hell is the agreement we came to?
The guy who's still a defendant, it takes a judge to dismiss these charges, is issuing a denial. No such deal. And the other guy, who seems like he's not worried about sticking to the official line, the Trump official, is blatantly saying, if we don't get what we want, we'll be back, as Eric Adams, the defendant and mayor of New York, laughs along. Now, that resignation I mentioned said, quote, Adams' attorneys repeatedly urged what amounted to a quid pro quo. And during the meeting, the deputy AG, as I mentioned, then admonished a member of the DOJ prosecution team who was taking notes and directed the collection of those notes at the meeting's conclusion. That matters because it is both unusual and incriminating. You don't seize your own notes from your own teammates like you did something wrong unless you're worried you did something wrong. And these are all lawyers. They all know how things work. But remember, in a proper and honest prosecution, when you have a meeting, you always take notes because you want to have very clear record evidence. They have an open case against this defendant. They have, we now know, a second indictment plan that was going to allege other obstruction by this defendant, Adams. And so you're going to be very meticulous. When the DOJ, the people in charge, start gathering up notes to, I guess, hide or destroy them, you have a problem. And remember, for all of the potential pessimism out there, there are still judges who oversee the DOJ. There are still laws on the books. And even if some of this takes longer, in time, there will be people at the DOJ all the way up to the top who may start to think about how close are they to the next election or the next one after that. Why do they want those notes hidden? It's a sign of weakness. They are worried that could get them in trouble, and it's incriminating. It's a sign they think they may have done nothing wrong. I will also state that that same DOJ official issued a lengthy letter rebutting all of this, and as mentioned earlier, the president has denied it. So there is a swirl of different statements. There's also information about the meetings between Beauvais and Adams' lawyers on the dismissal. The Times says it was upfront, extraordinary shattering of how these things work, with records revealing Beauvais talked to Adams' lawyers and wanted to, quote, refine their approach until they landed on a highly unorthodox argument. The case itself hindered his ability to address immigration. I'll tell you one thing on that before I show you more. Saying that a sitting politician, government official, is hindered in their job by a case is obvious. And that's not a Democrat or Republican thing. Here, this happens to be a Democratic mayor. You might recall Senator Menendez, a Democratic senator. You might recall other Republicans, George Santos. Having a political job doesn't ever give you carte blanche to break the law. Indeed, there's a public integrity section of the DOJ to deal with the public integrity of primarily public officials. So that statement right there is incriminating because it's just made up. One of the outgoing DOJ lawyers called it obviously pretextual, which is a fancy lawyer word for basically a lie. The problem isn't that the mayor can't do his job. The problem for the Trump folks is that they couldn't really dream up, even with all these smart lawyers, any valid reason that this case might go away, and they had some other lawyers around who built the case. Now I'll show you more. The DOJ's initial memo admitted the decision was made without assessing the strength of the evidence or the case's legal theories. In other words, this is not legal. This is not about the evidence. It's an abuse of power. And if it were a movie and you say, why is it so obvious? This isn't a mystery. We're not going to wait till later in the movie to find out the whodunit. They want it that way because, as I've told you, they are pushing at every level, testing what they can get away with, and trying to send a message to other political figures, especially in the Democratic Party, where they have less political leverage. It's not like the Republicans are doing a lot of dissent here, to try to set a new tone, to intimidate, and to see how much more they can get away with. Interestingly, while Mayor Adams seems fine with all this and faces a lot of risk if he wasn't, a heck of a lot of their own team, their own lawyers, their own former Scalia clerks are saying, no way.
And joining us now, former German Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, who served from 2009 to 2011 under former Chancellor Angela Merkel. Thank you so much for making time for us, Minister. I want to start with the potential negotiations to end the war in Ukraine and the mixed messaging coming from the U.S. side. Vice President Vance telling the Wall Street Journal in an article published today that sending U.S. troops to Ukraine is not off the table. But listen to Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and President Trump on this issue.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement. To be clear, as part of any security guarantee, there will not be U.S. troops deployed to Ukraine.
Maybe Russia will give up a lot, maybe they won't, and it's all dependent on what is going to happen. The negotiation really hasn't started.
Minister, what are allies taking away from this kind of messaging?
We are all puzzled, Anna. It's a messaging that changes almost on an hourly basis. Over the last few days, we were all quite surprised by the call that the president had with Vladimir Putin, and then especially by the fact that his newly appointed Secretary of Defense is obviously taking negotiation tokens off the table. So, and all of these things without having the European allies and partners somehow included. So there is confusion is probably the mildest word I can find for that.
If the U.S. doesn't continue to support Ukraine as it has over the last few years, do you have any concerns about Europe filling the void to support Ukraine on its own?
I certainly do. We are definitely not prepared to balance the current or the existing American security umbrella for Europe. It would take years to come to a level where we could feel as secure as we need to be. And on the other hand, of course, Trump has a point, and as had already Joe Biden and others before that the Europeans need to ramp up their security measures, and we need to do more without a question. However, in that situation right now, to question core elements of NATO, of the alliance, and of our shared security is reckless. And therefore, I sat in a room before when the vice president held his speech, and I just looked into rather confused faces. And he didn't talk about Ukraine at all, as you've said before. It was more or less lecturing Europe about democracy. Quite astonishing coming out of his mouth.
Take a listen to something else we heard from President Trump related to this war and Ukraine's desire to join NATO.
I don't see any way that a country in Russia's position could allow them, just in their position, could allow them to join NATO. I don't see that happening. And long before President Putin, Russia was very strong on the fact that I believe that's the reason the war started, because Biden went out and said that they could join NATO.
What's your reaction to those comments? Is that what allies expect to hear from the President of the United States?
Not at all, and it is beyond any historical knowledge. It's nonsense, and we all know that the war started out of very, very different reasons. And the problem we are facing right now with that phone call Trump had with Vladimir Putin is that, in our perception, it legitimizes aggression. And just consider what that means for the next years to come. So that is what should be discussed right now at the Munich Security Conference. Instead, we hear a pro-seminar about democracy.
Minister, President Trump has shown that he is willing to lean into a more aggressive maybe unconventional foreign policy strategy, starting with the tariffs that he's threatening to every global partner. And we heard from your country's president today that the new administration has no regard for established rules and grown trust, and they must accept that and deal with it. So I wonder, how will we see Europe shift their approach to this new Trump administration?
Well, we have to accept the fact that he is president, and we need to deal with a deal maker. However, I think we are in a new world right now in that regard. Europe is prepared. Europe has potential counter tariffs, but just imagine a world where we would slide into a trade war of that dimension. So this is nothing anyone would like to have, and the repercussions for the US might also be severe. So I think that's something the president has not taken into account so far. But if we are forced as Europeans to react, we will react, but that's not the world I'd like to live in.
Former German Defense Minister Karl Theodor zu Guttenberg, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate your perspective on all this.
The Trump administration has a brand new target as it slashes through the federal workforce. Officials are now advising federal agencies to fire probationary employees who have been on their jobs for less than 2 years. That's before civil service protections kick in. The Washington Post reports that the mass layoffs were delivered through pre-recorded videos and on group calls. Some employees were ordered to leave the building within 30 minutes. Others were told they would be formally fired by email, but the email never arrived. Let's bring in NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake. Jonathan Capehart is a member of the Washington Post editorial board and the host of MSNBC's Weekends with Jonathan Capehart. Garrett, do we have any idea how many people this could impact?
Only broadly, Chris. I mean, we know there will be many thousands of people ultimately laid off, but how many is a bit of an open question, and some of this is by design. The process is totally opaque, and it varies by agency. You could be a probationary employee at an agency like the CIA or somewhere in the intel community, or perhaps in a field related to immigration enforcement, where you might even get a notice that your position is being eliminated, but the administration actually wants to try to keep many of those people on. They don't want to cut people from national security roles, from immigration enforcement roles, and from other positions that are exempted throughout the federal government. All of this leaves us and these thousands of federal workers across the government essentially checking their email inbox periodically to try to figure out if they are caught up in this. And some of this is just sort of based on the ad hoc nature of the process here, but some of it is also by design. The White House has been pretty clear. They want to act fast. They want to break things. And Elon Musk even said the other day that they will at times go too far and have to claw some of these things back. So I think we're all going to be chasing this down in real time as these notices in different formats go out from agency to agency.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, when you look at these firing and how they were conducted, I wonder if you're hearing anything about workers in D.C. questioning whether even to keep working for the federal government.
Well, I know in the Washington Post story in the paper today, the story on these firings or the laying off of the probationary workers, it ends with one woman who got one of these emails saying that, she is done, and she asked her supervisor, "Does that mean that I should keep working on the project she was working on? Should she finish?" And her supervisor said, "No, you don't have to." I think, Chris, what we're seeing here is the federal workforce being part of a game of sorts, and by game I mean what President Trump is doing via Elon Musk is stretching the limits of executive power. He is doing lots of things that none of his predecessors has ever done. Things that are being tied up in the courts because there's a lot of questions about whether any of this is legal. And yet he's trying it. And we will see through these court cases whether these federal workers who are caught up in the middle of this, whether the president of the United States will be found having the ability to carry out these firings, these layoffs, these buyouts of workers.
One of the things that's talked about a lot in politics, certainly, but also in business, any place where people work, is the importance of building a bench. I mean, if you're looking at a cost-benefit analysis, you're obviously immediately cutting costs, or at least cutting costs after you pay them, some of them, for 7 months or whatever it is. versus, though, long-term expertise building. Right, Jonathan?
Yes, no, that's exactly it. I mean, there's so many things happening here. They're trying to reduce, quote unquote, waste, fraud, and abuse, excess fat, all of the pejorative ways of thinking about federal workers. And what we, the American people, are going to find out in short order, if we're not finding out already, is that these federal workers go to work every day and they bring their experience and their expertise, a lot of them built up over decades. You cannot replace that. And in the end, in order to backfill positions that are now empty, you're going to end up spending money. And we haven't even had that conversation yet about when something happens and an agency finds that it doesn't have a person, no longer has the person who knows how to do X, Y, or Z, you're going to have to find that person. And the difficulty will then be, who would want to work for the federal government after this experience?
In the meantime, attorneys general in 14 states have filed a lawsuit arguing that the Trump administration violated the appointments clause of the Constitution by granting sweeping powers to Elon Musk, arguing that he has, quote, transformed a minor position that was formerly responsible for managing government websites into a designated agent of chaos without limitation and in violation of the separation of powers. I mean, look, a lot of pushback from Musk's efforts have come from outside of Washington. There are at least 68 unions, 68 lawsuits, a bunch of them from unions and state AGs. But I'm curious whether you're hearing quietly behind the scenes or have an expectation of people in power in D.C., of course, Congress being the most obvious, starting to feel this is going too far, especially if they start hearing from their constituents.
Well, that's the key thing, starting to hear from their constituents. And that's where you're going to see, particularly Republicans in both the House and the Senate, trying to decide whether they have loyalty to the president and, doing what he wants for his agenda, or loyalty to their constituents and doing things that, help the people back at home. There have already been stories about how there are Republicans on Capitol Hill who are quietly trying to minimize the cuts, minimize the program disruptions that are now hurting already. They're already hearing from constituents, hurting their constituents. And that's what's, Chris, going to make, we're talking about federal workers right now, but we have a budget deadline that is coming up. And that is when we are going to see whether Republicans are able to get the president's agenda through, while at the same time either ignoring or not giving as much credence to the concerns of constituents back home.
Jonathan Capehart, always good to see you, my friend. Thank you.
Also, President Trump yesterday ordered his administration to determine how to impose reciprocal tariffs on all major U.S. trading partners. The order does not give a firm timeline for the tariffs. Senate Commerce Secretary nominee Howard Lutnick said the administration would look at countries one by one, with a final report expected by April 1st. The president yesterday was pressed by reporters about the possible impact of more tariffs.
What should consumers expect? Are prices going to go up short-term,
well,
long-term?
Not necessarily. I mean, not necessarily. But I'll tell you what will go up is jobs. The jobs will go up tremendously. We're going to have great jobs for everybody.
The prices go up, Mr. President, because of these tariffs. Who do you think voters should hold responsible?
Oh, I think what's going to go up is jobs are going to go up. And prices could go up somewhat short term, but prices will also go down. There could be some short term disturbance, but long term, it's gonna make our country a fortune.
So Americans should prepare for some short term pain.
No, you said that. I didn't say that.
Well, if the prices go up,
let's see what happens. Nobody really knows what is going to happen.
All right. So far, Trump has implemented only one set of the series of tariffs he has announced, an additional 10% levy on Chinese imports, a 25% tax on steel and aluminum imports announced this week, as well as 25% duties on imports from Canada and Mexico that Trump suspended would not go into effect until early March. This will have a huge impact ultimately on American consumers, Willie.
Yeah, prices are going to go up. Let's bring in the anchor of CNBC's Worldwide Exchange, Frank Holland. Frank, good morning. So let's talk first about how the markets are reacting to all of this morning, and also just how manufacturers, consumers across the country understand what tariffs will do. If you talk to somebody running a car dealership in Detroit or a parts manufacturer, prices are going to go up.
Well, first off, let's start off with the fact that tariffs are a tax on imported goods that are paid by businesses and often passed on to consumers. There still seems to be some confusion about that. So certainly there's a potential for price increases. When it comes to the market reaction, though, yesterday, after we saw the president's news conference in the Oval Office, we actually saw the markets move higher. Some of it was relief that the, reciprocal tariffs weren't being instituted that day, and the idea that there's going to be a study. And again, when we look at the markets this morning, we're seeing the futures actually in the red. The Dow's down about 100 points, the S&P and the NASDAQ down fractionally. So it seems to be some kind of mixed opinions, people really trying to figure all this out. When it comes to tariffs, however, there's a couple different camps. So there's many who argue, and these arguments are becoming louder, that these tariffs, they're just negotiating tactics. In fact, I had a guest on my show this morning from the American Enterprise Institute. He described the president as having a complex or sophisticated agenda when it comes to global trade, and he believes these tariffs could lead to tariffs imposed by other countries to be lowered proactively before the White House and U.S. agencies finish their study of tariffs. In fact, the Commerce Secretary who you just mentioned, the Commerce Secretary nominee who you just mentioned, who's leading that study, said the president's going to get that study on April 1st and then has the option to start these tariffs on April the 2nd, implying it's not really a foregone conclusion. And the fact that the president says he's going to match tariffs from other countries as opposed to universal tariffs that he discussed before, many people believe that will reduce global trade uncertainty, and that could in turn, and the could is the key word there, be a boost for the U.S. economy and a potentially increased foreign investment in the U.S. That's what the president was alluding to. Foreign investment in the U.S. leading to new jobs.
All right, CNBC's Frank Holland.
Wait, Mika, before you go, I think you guys are burying the lead. There's one other huge story happening today.
What's that?
Eagles parade today. Go Birds. Wow. Super Bowl champs, America's team.
Valentine's
right
Day.
Here. Go Birds. America's team won. America won. Thank goodness. I'm going to the parade later today.
To Philly today. A million Eagles fans.
Frank, you had an opportunity. You had an opportunity to say Happy Valentine's Day. No, you didn't.
Took it.
You didn't. No, you took it.
Mika, you already have a Valentine. My Valentine right here. The Birds.
There you go.
Mine's
Valentine is
Joe.
Saquon.
Okay. All right.
Have a great Valentine's Day, guys.
All
Thanks.
right.
Telephone.
Happy Valentine's Day. Okay. So we are hearing from the Wall Street Journal editorial board.
Yeah, they've been consistent on this. They're writing Trump's tariff stress test. The piece reads, is President Trump trying to put markets through a stress test? It feels like it. Stocks rallied Thursday after Mr. Trump announced a temporary reprieve from the global reciprocal tariffs he threatened earlier this week. Try to catch your breath before his next blunderbuss tariff shot. Trump's willy-nilly tariff threats on one day, off the next, create business uncertainty that will hurt U.S. investment and hiring. Mr. Trump's tariff threats encourage other countries to get closer to Beijing. U.S. businesses are huffing and puffing, but Xi Jinping is smiling, writes the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal. And Ali, you spoke to a member of Donald Trump's team, his economic team, yesterday and asked the very obvious question, won't prices go up with these new tariffs?
A very obvious question. One you saw the president there was asked himself, and he actually used very similar language to what his top economist told me yesterday on MSNBC. Just listen to that exchange. Can you, without invoking the past administration, guarantee that prices won't rise because of these tariffs?
Prices move up, prices move down. That's the way the world works, right? The economy.
Yeah, but you're an economist. You forecast trends like this. So will consumers see prices rise?
My expectation is that prices will fluctuate. And that when economists study the fluctuations of the prices, that they'll wonder what the causes were, and there will be many. And so am I confident that there won't be strong evidence of a price effect of tariffs? Yes, I am confident.
So he's saying he's confident. Look, that's a clip that we can save for later and see if it actually ends up being right. But it's exactly what the president then echoed about an hour or so later when he actually put these reciprocal tariffs into effect, or at least the starting bell for them. But I think Frank brings up a lot of really good points here, like the idea that there are open questions about if these tariffs will include carve-outs for industries like the automotive industry. That's something that on Capitol Hill we've already heard some murmurs about, agitating to have carve-outs like like that. There are questions about if this violates world trade agreements. And then, of course, the way that it impacts just the alliances and trade partnerships that we have on the world stage. So a lot of questions there. And then, of course, what the Wall Street Journal has said, Mika.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also just very quickly, some of this is just negotiations. Trump has had, for years now, said tariffs have to be part of this. So he's got to at least fall through to a time that's telling that this has been pushed off till April before it actually starts, or later, depending on the study. We'll suspect there could be. What he says he means. I think, certainly people are expecting these to come in some form, but perhaps not the quite degree he first promised.
But there seems to be an obsession, Willie, to blame the impacts, the consequences of some of these policies on Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Or go back to Obama. And I even saw it actually in a news conference yesterday with President Trump going back many presidents and blaming the war on Ukraine. I mean, it just...
Well, part of it.
We won't dig deep into that.
There's a connection between Ukraine and inflation, which is that Donald Trump on the campaign trail suggested he would wave a wand, and on day one he'd get a deal to end the war in Ukraine, and the prices would come down. Now, gas, groceries prices have gone up since then and may go up further if these tariffs actually come to pass.
Right, and there'll be no one that they can blame it on.
Right.
These are Trump's tariffs.
Joining us now, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin, NBC News national and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter, law professor at New York Law School and former assistant Manhattan District Attorney Rebecca Roiphe, and reporter for The City and co-host of the FAC NYC podcast, Katie Honan. All right, Lisa, it has been 5 days. Still nobody has taken this up. Nobody has dismissed this case.
That's correct. And Katie, we have new reporting that according to two former Justice Department sources, those who are remaining in the Public Integrity Unit, and I want to clarify for our viewers, our NBC News' Ryan Riley says there are about 25 to 30 lawyers in that unit total. 5 of them resigned last night. So of those who are remaining, they were convened for a meeting today by Emil Bovee, who is the acting Deputy Attorney General, and they were given an edict. Somebody in this room needs to sign that filing, and you need to tell me who it's going to be. One of my sources tells me that Bovee gave them 1 hour to come up with 2 names, and both of my sources say leadership positions were promised to whoever was willing to make that filing. And yet today at 3:04 p.m., we still have not seen a filing cross the docket in the Adams case. And it would be a motion from the Department of Justice seeking to dismiss the indictment under Rule 48 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. Still nothing.
Why would they not want to dismiss this case? Why has nobody yet stood up and said, I will do this for you, Emil Bovee?
First of all, nobody who's left in the Public Integrity Unit knows anything about this case. Everyone who worked on this case, and this was an investigation that dates back to 2021, everyone who was involved in the investigation with whatever agents were involved, those people are all gone. Whoever signs this filing will also theoretically be responsible for going to a hearing before Judge Dale Ho in the Southern District of New York and explaining why this deal was cut and why they believe it's in the interest of justice. You can imagine that nobody who wasn't involved with the case, much less anyone who was, would want to stand behind this and say that a dismissal without prejudice that somewhat hinges on the result of a new U.S. attorney being confirmed, but also on the results of the November election. That's express in the memo from Emil Bovee on February 10th. Nobody who's left would want to sign that because they have to stand up and defend it in a court of law where they also have a legal, not just an ethical, duty of candor.
So if none of them stand up, are they going to get fired?
It's not clear yet what's going to happen. And it's possible, there's another outlet, not NBC News or MSNBC, that is reporting that a person has been located and found. We have not yet matched that reporting. If somebody does do that, I just want to flag for you that that person is also likely going to be the person who has to come to court and stand behind it. It's not as simple as just signing the filing, making it, and moving on with your life.
Tom, this feels like a bona fide crisis. It makes the Saturday Night Massacre that we started with seem small.
It 100% is in the legal community. It is 100% not. It's Justice Department leadership. They don't care. They don't care about the video that you played at the top of the show. They don't care about what people are saying today. They don't care about what their former colleagues in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York have done, other than it's just created a hassle for them to get to the end goal here. And the end goal here for them is to achieve the objectives that have been laid out in the Trump administration. And their belief is one of those key objectives is, of course, immigration. And one of the ways that they can help solve that is by having the mayor of the city of New York cooperate with them so that, given the amount and the size, the believed size of the migrant community in New York City, that potentially large numbers of people could be removed from New York City, and that's a stated objective of this administration. I'm not saying that's my view or anybody's view. That's their view. That's where they're coming from, and that's what they're about. So they just don't care.
Tim,
and people think, well, they could be shamed into thinking that this is some sort of a crisis of justice. That doesn't matter to them. And so I think people need to understand that that's where we are at this stage, and they believe it is their ethical duty to effect these changes, and that the ethics and the concerns that Lisa rightfully points out with respect to this filing, and the very thing that the prosecutor who brought this case today said, in his belief, we do not live in a country where you can hang a prosecution over somebody's head in exchange for them to carry out a public act.
Yeah.
He says, I don't believe in that, and I don't think anybody should. I'm just telling you that the people that are behind this don't see it that way.
And just if you're wondering if there are politics involved here with these resignations, Sassoon and the other man in the SDNY's office, both conservatives. Sassoon clerked for Antonin Scalia, conservative on the Supreme Court. Rebecca, I know you've got an ethical link here to this. She cited one of your papers in her resignation letter, or her letter to AG Pam Bondi. But I want to get the background here for a second, and Tom alluded to this. He's talking about immigration. There's an immigration element to this, Katie Honan, because the administration wants their immigration policy enacted in New York City. They want to be able to come in here and deport immigrants. That's what they want. They say they want the mayor's help doing that. There was this moment, and this is why there's a quid pro quo tied up on this. Eric Adams says there's no quid pro quo, that he wasn't saying, get me off these charges and I'll help you with immigration. But then he appeared this morning on Fox News alongside the immigration czar, alongside the border czar, Tom Homan. Look.
My attorney, Alex Spira, one of the top trial attorneys in the country. Imagine him going inside saying that the only way Mayor Adams is going to assist in immigration, which I was calling for since 2022, is if you drop the charges. That's quid pro quo. That's a crime. It took her 3 weeks to report in front of her a criminal action. Come on, this is silly.
If he doesn't come through, I'll be back in New York City, and we won't be sitting on the couch. I'll be in his office, up his butt, saying, where the hell is the agreement we came to? I came to New York City. I wasn't going to leave up nothing. Right. I did the last time, and I told him I'm not leaving until I got something. And now I got him on the couch in front of millions of people. He can't back waving us now, right? So I think you're going to see things move in the right direction. I really, truly believe that.
All right, so that was Mayor Adams on Fox News with Tom Homan, and some people likened that, you can make your own judgment, to a hostage video. You heard Mayor Adams saying that it's not a quid pro quo, but Emil Bovee, in the letter saying to drop this case, cited the need for him to help with immigration enforcement. And then he's sitting alongside the immigration czar on Fox News, the president's preferred channel. So talk to me about what defines a quid pro quo and whether this would meet that standard.
Right, absolutely. Well, obviously, there are certain reasons that were put forth that seem clearly pretextual. So, first of all, they say this is...
When you say pretextual, for anybody who doesn't have a law degree, just define that for us.
Right, sure, of course. It seems like a fake excuse for a reason because it's so obviously incorrect. So, first they say, you know, we're issuing this order because this was obviously a weaponized prosecution, meaning that Damian Williams, the former U.S. attorney, did this for political reasons. First of all, it's not clear what those political reasons would have been. Second second of all, this is something that, as we were just talking about, as Lisa was saying, has been pursued through, I think, 4 or 5 different U.S. attorneys. So the idea that all of them would have some political axe to grind against a Democratic mayor is absurd. But in addition to that, I mean, whether or not this is a quid pro quo, it's obviously, has something to do with political, partisan, ideological purposes. And that is absolutely and completely inappropriate for a prosecutor to consider. Prosecutors take, and all lawyers take, an oath to enforce the law and the Constitution of the United States. And here, this is, in fact, worse than the Saturday Night Massacre, because in the Saturday Night Massacre, it was a politician who was ordering them to violate that obligation that they have to the law, to the rule of law. Here, these are top officials within the Department of Justice who are also lawyers, who should know better, and in fact, whose job it is to police that line. These lawyers are the ones who are supposed to make sure that those inappropriate political considerations coming from politicians like the president don't filter down to the line prosecutors who are supposed to be enforcing the law without fear or favor.
So what does this say about this Department of Justice?
It says, that this is a Department of Justice that is intent on breaking norms that have been...
Breaking norms or breaking laws?
Certainly breaking norms and potentially breaking laws, but certainly breaking norms that are fundamental to the rule of law and to our system of justice. And they have been in place since the beginning of our prosecutorial system, and especially since the Watergate, which, for the reasons that we were just discussing at the beginning of your program.
All right. So, Katie, let's get back to immigration and what's happening here in this city. Now that Mayor Adams has made this appearance on Fox News, now that this news has come out about the DOJ wanting to drop the case, all of these resignations, there has been a pretty loud public outcry, especially among other elected leaders in the city, for him to resign. What's his status at the moment?
He's still mayor, although I'm at City Hall right now and I don't see him. He's out of the office. He was taping, I guess, a Dr. Phil interview, again with Tom Homan, discussing what Tom Homan and President Trump want him to do about immigrants. The result of yesterday's meeting with Tom Homan, he said he's going to issue an executive order allowing ICE back on Rikers Island, the city's largest detention and jail center here, which is actually slated to be closed by 2027. This city council speaker, obviously they play a role in the laws here in the city as well. She said she won't do anything to repeal the city sanctuary laws, which is something the mayor had discussed as well, potentially amending the sanctuary laws, which can restrict and limit how much cooperation the city agencies can give to ICE. And what you're seeing is, like you said, a lot of criticism from opponents running against him for mayor. The primaries in June. And last night on your network, we saw Governor Hochul give her strongest rebuke against Mayor Adams. She has really defended him since he was indicted in September. But last night she said she was disturbed by the reporting coming out and just the resignation of so many top prosecutors over this case and what they're being asked to do. She said she's going to discuss things with other lawmakers and other officials. You saw more people today, state senators asking for him to resign. Public advocate Jumaane Williams said on another network today that he doesn't think Mayor Adams can be the mayor anymore. So you have this chorus of people asking him to step down and figuring out what they can do because they do not think that the mayor can effectively be the mayor anymore because he is so clearly, to them, compromised.